In the early 1900s, Corvallis, Oregon was home to a cult called the Holy Rollers, started by Franz Edmund Creffield that took the town by storm. The crime that Edmund Creffield committed in Corvallis was thought to be one of the greatest crimes ever made public in the city's history. Not much is known about Edmund Creffield's early life, though it is assumed he was born around 1873 in Germany. Edmund Creffield first appeared in Portland, Oregon, in 1903 and joined the Salvation Army. Later that year, he was sent on a mission to the town of Corvallis, 83 miles south of Portland. When Edmund Creffield came to Corvallis, it was a small town and home to Oregon Agricultural College, which today is called Oregon State University. Edmund Creffield soon became disenchanted with the Salvation Army. He quit and started preaching on his own. One by one, Edmund Creffield persuaded women to join him, to seek refuge from their sinful lives, even though the women led relatively sin-free and well-off lives. His followers believed he was receiving messages directly from God. Edmund Creffield even convinced some of the town's married women to leave their husbands to join his church, which was called the Bride of Christ Church. Edmund Creffield preached non-stop for hours, and his church earned a reputation for being an eccentric group of religious zealots. Their services, which often lasted until sunrise, mainly involved the devoted rolling on the ground, begging the Almighty for forgiveness. They became known as the Holy Rollers. Most all of the men left the Holy Rollers, leaving only Edmund Creffield and one other man as leaders of a flock of exclusively women. Following Edmund Creffield's instructions, the women had cut off all relations with their infidel husbands, friends, and children. Soon, rumors of depravity and free love spread throughout the Willamette Valley. The town of Corvallis was quickly tiring of the Edmund Creffield shenanigans, and he was barred from holding services within city limits. In the summer of 1903, he and his followers moved a few miles outside Corvallis and camped on Kiger Island along the Willamette River. When the fall rains started, Sarah Hurt and her 3 children, Maud, Frank, and May, some of his most ardent followers, invited him and about 20 others to move into their house just outside Corvallis. In October, as part of a ceremony, the group burned most of the house's contents, including furniture, utensils, and heirlooms. They also burned a dog that was already dead. Rumors that a cat and a baby had been sacrificed were false. In January 1904, 20 vigilantes called the White Caps tarred and feathered Edmund Creffield and told him to leave and never come back. The next day, instead of leaving, Edmund Creffield married 23-year-old Maud Hurt, one of his followers, in a room where the odor of pine tar was noticeable. In March, Holy Roller Church member 23-year-old Donna Mitchell Starr signed a statement in Portland, Oregon, claiming that she had an adulterous relationship with Edmund Creffield. Adultery was a criminal offense in Oregon at the time, and Edmund Creffield went into hiding from the police. John Manning, the Multnomah County District Attorney for the Portland area, issued an arrest warrant, and a statewide search for Edmund Creffield went on for months. Many of Edmund Creffield's followers began to spend their days lying on the floor face down, praying and claiming to receive messages from God. Worried friends and family petitioned judges to have them committed to the insane asylum, and most were. Those over 18 years old were sent to the Oregon State Insane Asylum in Salem, and those who were younger were sent to the Boys and Girls Aid Society in Portland. In July, 1 month after Sarah Hurt was committed to the insane asylum, Edmund Creffield was discovered nude and starving under her house. Edmund Creffield was arrested. He said he was innocent and told the court it was part of a God-ordered purification ritual. It still isn't known if he purified any other women in his cult, but everyone instantly assumed he had. Edmund Creffield was found guilty and served 17 months in the Oregon State Penitentiary. In 1906, Edmund Creffield was released from prison. When released, he claimed he was Jesus Christ risen from the dead, his resurrection being his emergence from prison. Soon after Edmund Creffield was released from prison, the Great San Francisco earthquake struck on Wednesday, April 18, 1906 at 5:12 a.m. People felt the shaking from Oregon to Southern California. Edmund Creffield's followers believed that he was responsible for the San Francisco earthquake and that he would destroy Corvallis. Edmund Creffield returned to Corvallis just long enough to collect his scattered flock back together and lead them out of town. Just as Moses had done so many years before, he was going to lead his people into the wilderness, to a patch of unimproved woodland near Waldport on the coast, and God would take care of them there. Among the women in Edmund Creffield's flock, at the time he went to prison, were Cora Hartley and her 23-year-old daughter Sophia. She was a student at Oregon Agriculture College studying history. Cora and Sophia Hartley answered the call immediately and started getting ready to leave. But Cora's husband, Lewis Hartley, was not happy when Edmund Creffield called for his former flock to follow him into the wilderness. Lewis Hartley was one of the wealthiest men in Corvallis. He was worth $1.2 million, around $45 million in today's money. He wondered why his wife would choose to live in a wigwam in the wilderness instead of the magnificent new 10-room house he had just built for her. Cora and Sophia Hartley left town on T. Egginton Hogg's railroad line from Corvallis to Yaquina City to join their prophet by the sea. Lewis Hartley followed his wife and daughter. When he arrived in Yaquina City, Lewis Hartley realized he had lost their trail. The two women had spotted him en route and got off early at Toledo to shake him. So Lewis Hartley took a ferry to Newport and tried to find a judge who would order Edmund Creffield's arrest. None would. Lewis Hartley went to a sporting goods store instead, and with a brand new .32 caliber revolver in his pocket, he started searching for Edmund Creffield. Not finding him in Newport, Lewis Hartley boarded the ferry and returned to Yaquina City. As his ferry was docking, he saw another ferry just getting ready to depart, and his wife and daughter were standing on the stern with Edmund Creffield. Lewis Hartley leaped from his ferry and ran to the other ferry just as it pulled away from the pier. He drew his revolver and opened fire on Edmund Creffield, who stood on the ferry facing him, a few yards away. 5 clicks rang out. The bullets Lewis Hartley had bought with the pistol were the wrong type for the gun. He had loaded the rimfire pistol with centerfire ammo. Although he put a good face on it at the time, Edmund Creffield seems to have taken this lesson to heart. From then on, he was a hard man to find, always on the move. He led his flock to the wilderness camp, but didn't stay long. When Lewis Hartley returned with a Winchester rifle to try again, Edmund Creffield was long gone. Edmund Creffield and his wife Maud Hurt left the group of followers at a camp near Yachats, telling them that the couple was going to British Columbia to establish a new colony. A group of 5 women from his flock, along with a baby, stayed on the coast and migrated south by foot. Locals in Waldport and the other small communities along the way had no interest in helping them. The women eventually found shelter in a small sea cave, known today as Preacher's Cave, located about 4 miles south of Yachats. Meanwhile, Edmund Creffield resurfaced in Seattle in hopes of starting anew. He rented a sparsely furnished room and went about his business of accumulating followers. His dream was short-lived. At 7:10 a.m. on May 7, 1906, Edmund Creffield was walking down First Avenue, near Cherry Street in Seattle with his wife Maud Hurt. A man named George Mitchell walked up behind him with a pocket pistol. George Mitchell was the brother of 2 of Edmund Creffield's most devoted followers, Esther Mitchell and Donna Mitchell Starr. As you may recall, Donna Mitchell Starr was the woman Edmund Creffield was convicted of having an adulterous relationship with. George Mitchell shot Edmund Creffield in the back of his head. Much to the shock of his followers, their Messiah was shot dead in the street. George Mitchell made no attempt to flee. In fact, he readily admitted to what he had done. After the police arrived, George Mitchell quietly handed over his pistol. "I have only done my duty," he told the officers according to police reports. "I came here to kill that man. He ruined my 2 sisters. I have completed my work." Would George Mitchell be found guilty for this crime, or was he only doing what any good brother would do? A jury would decide, and almost every newspaper, not only in the Northwest but all over America, would cover the trial on their front page. The defense's case argued that George Mitchell murdered Edmund Creffield because he believed Edmund lusted after George's 18-year-old sister Esther Mitchell, and that Edmund had selected her to be the mother of the next Christ child. John Manning, the Multnomah County District Attorney who had issued an arrest warrant in Oregon for Edmund Creffield a few years earlier for adultery, sent a letter to the King County Prosecuting Attorney, Kenneth McIntosh, of the Seattle, Washington area, saying that the taking of the law into one's own hands, under such circumstances, to mete out summary justice was almost excusable. Kenneth McIntosh was appalled by the letter from John Manning. Meanwhile, Archibald Frater, the judge in the case, said that the state of Washington was not like Oregon where lynching and mob law and anarchy ruled. And Seattle Police Chief Charles Wappenstein declared that he had had enough of the Holy Rollers and that no more of them would be tolerated in Seattle. He said that he wished these Oregon people would kill each other on their own side of the Columbia River. The trial was something of a landmark for Seattle. There was widespread sympathy for George Mitchell. When the trial concluded, the jury found George Mitchell not guilty, in spite of the fact that he had admitted in open court that he shot Edmund Creffield. The members of the jury, no doubt, thought they were doing him a favor. They were gravely mistaken. A few days later, George Mitchell met his sister Esther Mitchell in a railroad depot for what other family members hoped would be a reconciliation. As he boarded a train to Portland, Oregon, Esther Mitchell shot her older brother George Mitchell in the back of the head with a pocket pistol, in almost exactly the same way he had gunned down Edmund Creffield. Esther Mitchell had killed her brother using a pistol she and Maud Hurt, the wife of Edmund Creffield, had purchased with their witness fees. In the aftermath of this shocker, the newspaper reporters wanted Esther Mitchell to tell them God had told her to avenge Edmund Creffield's death, or that somehow a religious frenzy had made her do it. At her trial, Esther Mitchell was found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to Western State Psychiatric Hospital in Steilacoom, Washington. Shortly after the trial, Edmund Creffield's widow, Maud Hurt, killed herself by taking a massive dose of strychnine. Meanwhile, unaware of any of these events, were the 5 women and the baby in the small sea cave. They had been there for 3 weeks. They survived on mussels, clams, crabs, and whatever else they could scavenge from the surrounding seashore. They all steadfastly agreed that it was only a matter of time before their savior Edmund Creffield came for them. In the spring of 1906, when timber cruiser George Hodges came upon them and told them their leader was dead, they didn't believe him. One of the women in the cave reportedly told Hodges that Edmund Creffield was the second Messiah. Not only wouldn't they believe he was dead, they also had no interest in leaving. Edmund Creffield had told them to remain where they were until his return. They refused every offer that George Hodges made to see them safely back to civilization. George Hodges told a newspaper at the time that they would rather starve to death than disobey his instructions. George Hodges left them all the food he had and set out to find help. This wasn't an easy task. Ignoring his pleas for these women's safety, folks living in the area had no interest in helping these holy rollers. George Hodges found no assistance, and the women were not extracted from the cave until word reached relatives in Corvallis, who contracted with a Waldport farmer to help them back to civilization. After extraction from the cave, the women were sent to mental hospitals around the state to be cured of their religiosity. From then on, the rocky cave on the Oregon coast would be known as Preacher's Cave, even though the preacher it referred to never actually set foot inside the cave. A few years later, after being released from the insane asylum, Esther Mitchell, the woman who had shot dead her brother George, took a massive dose of strychnine and died, following the example of Maud Hurt, Edmund Creffield's widow. Time has clouded the memory of what happened over 100 years ago. Today, only shadows of the past remain. The story of the Holy Rollers is a fascinating and disturbing chapter in Oregon's history. It is a tale of charismatic leadership, blind faith, and societal upheaval. While the cult's influence eventually waned, the legacy of the Holy Rollers serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the fragility of human belief. Subscribe and leave a comment saying, "I subscribed," and I'll personally reply to your comment. If you like this Oregon adventure, please give a thumbs up and click on the like button. Thanks so much for watching.